So there's three of us here presenting today, and we're going to kind of split up a little bit. So yeah, welcome. We're going to talk a bit about the programs that we have at Surrey Place that are supporting Northern communities. We want to go ahead, Layla.
Yeah, there we go.
So this is our land acknowledgement for Toronto. I'll encourage people to read it. I actually am situated in Barrie, so I like to acknowledge like the land that I'm on, Treaty 16, Treaty 18, the Williams Treaty. And because of the work that we're doing, because it spans across the province, we often are on different land than Surrey Place itself. I also just want to kind of center myself and just acknowledge my place in this work. So I'm a ninth generation Canadian. And so my family has a long history of being in Canada, tied to colonization and really treaties that weren't upheld. And I continue to benefit from that. So comes with responsibility, and really my responsibility to continue to learn the truths of history and to just really be mindful of truth and reconciliation and how I can support that in real ongoing ways. The other piece of it is I'm going to read some of this, but it's around harm reduction and how harm reduction is really that part of what I'm going to talk about is a harm reduction project that we have and just how it's also really tied to colonization, and we see the colonial systems really continue to shape that health, access, safety through substances, but also through structures and choice, autonomy, and care. So I guess I just acknowledge my commitment to keep learning, my commitment to listen to the Indigenous voices that I am very privileged to spend time with and learn from. And especially those with living and lived experience, which is also a big part of the work that all of us do. And just to support really just respectful, person-centered approaches and just mindfulness of the communities that all three of us are welcomed into and really privileged to be able to work with. So thank you for allowing me to kind of center that and talk about that. I'll give everyone, if you want to just take a minute, we'll just take 30 seconds to kind of think about where you are and kind of your role within the work that we do with the Northern communities. Yeah. All right, thanks everyone for taking a minute. So my name is Jennifer Altasar. As Susan said, thanks so much for the opportunity. I am one of the three people that are presenting today from Surrey Place. I am a manager at Surrey Place. I'm very privileged to work with a very creative and new team supporting a harm reduction model of service and a harm reduction program to support people specifically with intellectual disabilities called Safer Steps My Way. Yeah, I also support other programs at Surrey Place, but really I'll be focusing on Safer Steps My Way. I guess, Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is also Jennifer, and I am one of the managers for the Mashtiki Winawag Mazana Tijikan Wichawagwin MMW Clinical Video Conferencing Program, a mouthful. And our program provides clinical services to Northwestern Ontario for adults age 18 and over. And we work with the Developmental Services Ontario as well. And I'll pass it over to Leah.
Hi, I'm Layla Hall. I'm a clinical psychologist at Surrey Place. I kind of split my time partly in the adult program at Surrey Place, but also mostly working with our northern partners, traveling to and from Northwestern Ontario and providing services through telehealth. So primarily today we'll talk about the work that we do, our long-standing contract with the Lac Seul Education Authority, but I also have partnership with SLIFNA, the Sioux Lookout First Nations Health Authority, and Pelican Falls First Nations High School. Yeah.
I wonder just if I could just insert, I'm so sorry, if it's something I forgot at the beginning, and I want to make sure people know how we can handle this, and maybe the presenters can weigh in on this as well. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and if you want to put questions into the chat, then maybe the presenters could take breaks where it makes sense for them, and I could bring forward some of those questions, or we could wait until the end and do them at the end. So whichever way the presenters want to go, but ideally, if what you could do is put your questions along the way into the chat, then we can manage this in terms of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. The other thing is we did get some questions ahead of time. And so some of those will be captured within, like they'll be captured organically within the presentation. And quite transparently, there's a few that I don't know that we have the answer for, but we'll do our best to answer what we can. And we'll come back to some of those that weren't captured. But if anyone sent in questions ahead of time and they aren't answered, feel free to put something in the chat for sure. Yeah, I guess Jen.
Oh, this is my slide. Okay.
Oh.
So
No, mine. Sorry, mine. Having two Jens work very closely is sometimes gets complicated. Okay, so we're just gonna these are the learning objectives that we hope to get to. So understanding of Surrey Place partners and how we partner with Northern Indigenous and rural communities. We're going to talk a bit about kind of what we've learned, successes, challenges, also how we've modified things once we have learned things about how to work in those communities. And then we really want to tie it back into how our programs intersect with justice. And again, some of that's going to come up a bit organically in the different connections we have in Northern Ontario. And then, but if there are questions you have specifically around that, again, we feel free to put questions into the chat.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. I'm just going to kind of touch base a little bit about our agency. And I think that was one of the questions that was asked, to get to know about our agency a little bit. So we are a not-for-profit organization that helps people of all ages with autism, developmental, and sensory-related concerns push the boundaries of what's possible to achieve new victories. We go with a holistic approach to ensure everyone in a client's circle of care, whether that be their behavior analysts, occupational therapists, psychologists, physiotherapists, speech and language pathologists, and more, can collaborate to work in the client's best interests. We also work with our clients throughout their lives, creating inventive and innovative programs so they can keep building their skills, grow their self-confidence, and set their sights even higher. For children, our approach revolves around the family unit, and for adults, we support their independence. Since 1962, we've been supported. We support people with varying complex needs in the Toronto region, and more recently in Northwestern Ontario, which you'll hear all about in our presentation. Surrey Place is accredited with exemplary standing by Accreditation Canada through the healthcare program. And so today, as Jennifer had said, we are focusing our lunch and learn about the programs that we are involved with, providing services in Northwestern Ontario, and the population we serve are children and adults with suspected or confirmed intellectual developmental disability, including those with mental health wellness needs. And so as a reference, this is the map that we like to use to showcase truly how big Ontario is. A lot of us live near the bottom of the map, and towards the top are the areas that we serve, which include far north communities. And now I will pass it on to Layla.
Great. So we thought we would also just kind of briefly talk about intellectual disability, because that is primarily the population that we support at Surrey Place. And so just to help everyone kind of get on the same page about the types of clients that we often work with, and that we'll be referencing largely throughout today's presentation. So intellectual disability is a lifelong condition that is characterized kind of by three characteristic traits. So the first is differences in intellectual ability, where intellectual abilities are well below age expectation, usually the bottom 2 percentile of people their age. So that means that 98% of people their age have stronger intellectual abilities for reasoning and problem solving and learning and applying their knowledge compared to people with intellectual disability. Roughly, we will say that people with intellectual disability as adults have cognitive abilities similar to people who are 12 years of age or younger. And then this can be kind of complicated by the fact that, while cognitive abilities might be at a 12-year-old age or younger, there are also like biological, physiological, and social changes that may be more advanced. And so trying to balance between somebody who is maybe interested in more mature social relationships or in more advanced daily living skills, but has the cognitive abilities of someone who is still quite young, that can pose a lot of challenges in their life. And so the second piece of the diagnosis is really looking at adaptive functioning, or one's ability to gain personal independence in their everyday life. Things like conceptual, social, and practical skills like cooking, cleaning, navigating the community, budgeting, managing, their emotions and change and things like that. So again, we expect that to see much below other people their age and of age expectation, which will cause all sorts of challenges for people in that they need more support, help to help them achieve their goals, to live more independently, and to kind of achieve the things that they like to do. And then the third piece of this is that for an intellectual disability diagnosis, we need to see evidence of this starting in the developmental period, so before the age of 18. If we see kind of challenges with cognition later in life, then that might suggest that there's a different diagnosis that might account for those. I think of most relevance when we're thinking about people who come into the contact with the criminal justice system is just keeping in mind that these are people who have this a lifelong condition that will continue to impact them for the rest of their life. This isn't like a transient or treatable condition that may resolve in a period of time. It's also helpful, especially when we're thinking about working with First Nations or Indigenous populations, that there's a lot of different views and perspectives on intellectual disability and neurodiversity or neurodiverse conditions in general. Intellectual disability is a very westernized medical term. It's a diagnostic term and isn't likewise like autism or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. These are also diagnostic westernized terms. And it's helpful to also think about some other perspectives, in particular the neurodiversity lens, understanding that just like we have racial, cultural, or sexual diversity, we also have diversity in the way that our brains develop. And so neurodiversity really refers just to the idea that everyone processes information and operates in the world in different ways because of how their brains develop. These are not deficits, but rather differences in how people live and experience the world that need to be supported to help them fit in the world that and the environments that they're living in. Also, from an Indigenous perspective, there is a lot of traditional teaching that talks about individuals with disability being viewed as those who have special gifts, a special connection to spirituality, or a special purpose. Often we'll talk about how people with intellectual disability or neurodevelopmental conditions are often here to teach us lessons in creativity, in patience, in social engagement, in different ways of thinking. And so there's respect to be given to people who have neurodevelopmental conditions. Oddly, my mic just decided to mute me. They have their own, teachings to give us. I think it's also important to recognize that we don't always hear about these views anymore, largely because of the impact of culture, of colonization on culture and our cultural understanding of disability. So we think about the impacts of colonization on Indigenous populations. This is really directly contributed to and continues to contribute to the Indigenous experience of disability through many different processes. So one of the challenges with colonization is that there was forced separation from traditional cultural practices. And these are practices that would have encouraged traditional belief systems and ways of supporting and managing and living in harmony with neurotypical and neurodiverse people together. In terms of the impacts of colonization, it introduced often harmful misconceptions about neurodevelopmental conditions, also has isolated Indigenous people from understanding neurodiverse conditions. It's limited the type of research that we have. Most of our research on neurodevelopmental conditions and intellectual disability is from a Western lens and doesn't integrate Indigenous populations, so may not be the best fit with the people that we serve in the North. And there's also limited access to education and supports and knowledge. And finally, when we think about, people, First Nations people or Indigenous peoples in our country and in our province, they are often stigmatized already. There's often, power differentials in what they're in the people that they're interacting with, especially when they're interacting with organizational systems like the criminal justice system or healthcare. And then on top of that, there is an additional stigma associated with being neurodiverse. And so often families may feel afraid about what might happen to them if they reveal that their child or they have an intellectual disability. Often in the past, the historical experience has been that that will be punished. There might be separation, there might be really negative consequences. And so this really shapes how neurodiverse individuals are seen and supported in Indigenous communities. And we just kind of bring up all this stuff about intellectual disability to highlight that there's a lot of important reasons to understand intellectual disability and to see how that uniquely presents in each person you work with who might be presenting with an intellectual disability. It's very important in terms of building self-awareness and encouraging empowerment in our clients for people with intellectual disability. Learning about their disability can help them understand their strengths and challenges. And for people working with IDD, taking the time to understand their unique profiles can also help you to understand how they might best engage with the criminal justice system and advocate for themselves and how you may advocate for them. It's also important to have understanding and respect about how people with intellectual disability choose to live their lives, want to live their lives, to give value to the goals that they wish to achieve, and to think about how we can do that. So when we understand intellectual disability, it really promotes better inclusion in terms of how can we support people engaging in different systems and environments that otherwise they may not be the best fit for them or not built for the way that they think and process information. And that will also help us to better support our families and our individuals who have IDD, and encourages also better advocacy for rights, understanding what rights that they do have, how that comes into intersection with legal rights and laws, and then also opportunities for them to be more successful, to rehabilitate, to build skills that will help prevent further offending down the road. These are important kind of considerations. And how do we also meaningfully integrate people with IDD into communities? A lot of communities benefit and become stronger when they have good understanding and ability to support people with IDD. And likewise, people with IDD will live happier, healthier lives when they have meaningful engagement in the communities that they are part of. All right. I think I keep going here because now we're going to talk about our various partnerships and programs, just to give you guys a sense of how we, the different ways in which Surrey Place kind of serves the North and works with Indigenous and rural communities. So I'll talk first about our work on the Lac Seul Education Authority. So our team is a interprofessional team with behavior therapy, occupational therapy, psychology, social work, and most recently the addition of speech and language pathology. We work primarily with children from kindergarten up to grade 8. So a lot of our clients are not necessarily coming into conflict with the criminal justice system often, but we still have a lot of learning to share, and sometimes we do. As you'll see in this map, we're down in the bottom right corner, Toronto, and when we travel to Sioux Lookout and Lac Seul, we fly to Thunder Bay, which is at the top of Lake Superior here, and then we fly again on a very small plane to Sioux Lookout, and then from Sioux Lookout, it's about another hour drive to the different communities in Lac Seul. Lac Seul is comprised of 3 different communities. And so we work in all 3, and there's a school in each community that we collaborate with, providing assessment and intervention services across all of our various clinical services. This is just to kind of show you how beautiful it is up there. It's very enticing to work in the north. You get to see a lot of wildlife. It's very peaceful, particularly in the summer when it's a bit warmer. But there's something really great about the north too, where people embrace the cold and just get out there and do ice fishing and snowmobiling and live on the land, and enjoy everything that the north has to offer. So just to give you a sense of what it's like when we are up there. And yeah, so just to elaborate a little bit more on the types of services we provide, we have our core services, which are direct client care, including assessment, intervention, and consultation, either directly to the students themselves or to parents or to teaching staff to help support those kids. We're not always necessarily working with kids who have intellectual disability or neurodiverse conditions. Sometimes it'll be other mental health concerns or learning difficulties. We also provide support services, so resource development or staff support, and professional development trainings to help build capacity in the north. And then we also have regular consultation meetings with the school to help us kind of have ongoing caseload management and flag any concerns. So often some of our clients might just be seen for a brief period of time to address a particular issue. A lot of them we see for a number of years. Or at least for the duration of the school year, to do that work. And we may have 1 or more clinicians involved depending on the complexity, and we provide that service through in-person and telehealth hybrid model. Specifically in terms of intersection with the criminal justice system, sometimes we are doing work with clients that might be seen as preventative support, especially for clients who we know may be at risk for coming into contact with the criminal justice system. So that might include things like behavior support planning around like risky or oppositional type behaviors, conduct-related concerns. Often we're also doing counseling or psychotherapy to help build more appropriate coping skills or to help process emotion in more helpful and healthy ways for kids. And sometimes we're also connecting people with other resources to help make sure that the family or the child is appropriately supported and doesn't end up in a place of stress where then it leads to criminal justice involvement. Occasionally, our clients do come into contact with the criminal justice system. Sometimes it's just interactions with the police where there are no formal charges, and sometimes there are formal charges involved. So often we'll do consultation with CGS professionals. We also often will participate in healing circles. So the concept of a healing circle is bringing together all of the affected parties who've been impacted by the criminal offending type behavior, and it gives an opportunity for everyone to speak and to be heard and to heal in a relational way. So often that is a big part of supporting our kids and younger kids who have come into trouble with the police often, or who have made some minor offense against a community agency or group of people. We also will do assessments to support understanding of a client's diagnosis or cognitive profile, but we don't do risk assessments or parenting capacity assessments as part of our work in Lac Seul or at Surrey Place in general. that's our program. And we'll talk more about like adaptations and how we've modified our service model later in the presentation, but I'll let Jen take over. Janelle, take over now.
Thank you, Layla. So we have a little bit of a different program. Ours is one of the subdivisions that's part of the adult program, and it is the Mosh Kiki Winawag Mazanatish again, Win, which is in Ojibwe. When translated, means a group of clinicians helping through video conferencing. People who live in remote communities can experience barriers to clinical services, and the difference with our program is that we service the population of age 18 years and older, and these individuals may have or suspected of IDD living in Northwestern Ontario as well, and direct service consultation and training are provided to individuals and their support providers using video conferencing technology mainly provided by the Ontario Telemedicine Network, which is OTN, as well as Teams, the one that we're all on right now. And I would also like to add that although COVID has made virtual popular and trending, the MMW team has been virtual for over 21 years. Next slide, please. And so the goals of our program include promoting independence and enhancing overall quality of the lives of individuals with IDD and or with mental health well-being challenges. The core theme of clinical service provision encompasses the goal of supporting capacity building locally and embracing the unique Northern culture, which Layla had mentioned a little bit about her program as well. And so our team, although not primarily an Indigenous team, we are diverse, and it really is through the years of building and showing up online and on clinical trips that have helped us really continue to have the privilege of working with those in these areas. And so our specific team consists of 4 clinical regional access coordinators. They are our main connection to our clients and partners, and we have someone located in Fort Frances, somebody in Dryden, and 2 in Sioux Lookout servicing the area, plus 33 far north First Nations communities. We also work with a psychologist that oversees our psychometrist who does our eligibility assessments. And our social worker supports that counseling piece. We also have 2 behavior analysts who support the behavior therapy service, and we run a psychiatry clinic on Wednesday afternoons. Next slide. These are some more of the services that are often requested, and just to note that all referrals do have to come through what is called Developmental Services Ontario, where they register the individual and can request MMW for clinical services or request MMW to reach out to our partner external agencies for services such as speech and language or occupational therapy that we may not provide. If the individual is suspected of having an intellectual or developmental disability, the request may be made for our psychology team to assess for eligibility. But before referring, as we all know, the contact person must ensure that the person is aware of the referral and has consented. Next slide. And for a little bit about the our connection with the justice piece, MMW works collaboratively with Canadian Mental Health Association, dual diagnosis, court diversion, and court support workers, as we often do have mutual clients. We support when needed with consultation with the diversion process by accessing clinical services that can help tailor conditions that may be better appropriate when working with clients through an inclusive lens that can help lead them to success, such as prevention with future encounters with the law by going through that model of therapeutic jurisprudence. We also do work with the Kenora District Jail when the client is incarcerated, and this is really a time where client is adhering to a routine and is in a stable environment, and they're able to engage in services or assessments. Our coordinators up there work diligently with the staff to help book appointments and do future planning and service coordination, and our clients are entitled to services and can continue with them even when incarcerated. We also work with probation officers to create understanding and increase accessibility. Coordinators and clinicians support this by giving feedback about using language-friendly options when working with the IDD population, and clinicians have the ability to support by tailoring material that is expected of these clients to be completed in a way that the client can understand and complete based on their cognitive level. We also work with the Anishinaabe Police Service, and that's in the far north communities to promote awareness and understanding of the clients that we serve who may not fully appreciate the consequences of their actions, which can be harmful, illegal, or risk safety of others. They are invited to our case conferences with Client Circle of Care to engage and support the individual. And I just want to lastly touch base a little bit about the Band Council resolution where, MW has worked with individuals who have received what's called the BCR, where the individual's not able to go back to their community. And so our clinical regional access coordinator has helped with communicating information and progress of the individual to support a potential BCR lift so that the person can go back to their home community. Individuals who have been banned are sometimes tied with the justice system, and once expectations are completed and a judge or somebody signs off, our coordinators then help the client transition back home. One of the ways is by connecting with chief and council, as well as the family and individuals from the nursing station. And I keep talking about far north communities, and so some places where you may recognize some of the names out of the 33 is Wiagamo, Casablanca, North Spirit Lake, Sachico Lake, just to kind of name a few. And I will pass it on to Jennifer.
Sorry, I was muted, but I did it myself, Layla. It did not happen out of the blue. Thanks, Jen. So I'm probably the newest to the Northern work. Our team is really new. So I'm going to talk a bit about Safer Steps My Way, which is a new program at Surrey Place, and just a bit about harm reduction tied to those with an intellectual or developmental disability, and just our work that is very new and just starting in the North. So I wanted to start with a bit of a I know that many people on this call do harm reduction. So I wanted to start with a little kind of comparing harm reduction to those within and outside of the neurodiverse world or the neurodivergent world. So as we know, harm reduction, meeting people where they're at, safety over abstinence, non-judgmental, compassionate, empowering, giving info, giving tools, really recognizing strengths and really encouraging autonomy. So that's all the same for people who have an intellectual disability. But I think really why this work matters and why we want to do this is because we know that people with intellectual disabilities use substances. We know from what minimal information we can find that it can be at higher rates than the general population. We know that they don't always fit within the existing harm reduction supports. So the idea of NAAA or treatment programs, treatment homes, that kind of thing, the people that we're working with don't always fit within that because the work may not be accessible. It may not fit with what their needs are. So yeah, we know that they're rarely designed with people with IDD in mind. And the other thing that has come up quite often within the developmental service world is around risk-averse housing. So many of the housing providers continue to see the individual using substances as the people that aren't using substances or aren't identifying that they use substances as the victim, as the person at risk, that kind of thing. And they see such strong risk of supporting someone with who's using substances that the risk aversion is just really strong. So we know that people with IDD, as it says here, are often told that services aren't for them, and they are being asked to, fit into systems that just aren't built for them. So our hope in this is that we are kind of creating systems that will fit them and are really co-designed by them. Next slide. So what needs to be different? This is kind of what we're learning, what we know. We know plain language and visual supports. We know that plain language is better for everyone, not just people with an intellectual disability. We know that what works for people that are neurodiverse or neurodivergent or have an intellectual disability is slower pace, repetition, the idea of following a 6-week treatment program with new topics every week and with timelines and that kind of thing. We know that's not going to work. Repetition. I'm going to talk a bit about our needs assessment, but we know that people are relationship based and people with an intellectual disability are no different. So they want people to show up when they say they're going to show up. They want to be able to create relationships with people. They want to be able to trust the people that they're working with. We need to have really flexible definitions of success. So we were really clear when we started to look at creating the Safer Steps program, which I'll get into a bit more around what that program is. We knew that not everyone's goal is going to be not using substances. We know that not everyone's goal is going to look the same, and we needed to really identify what success looked like and be able to be really flexible about it. Autonomy, supported decision making. I think within the world of developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities, there's still that protective nature. There's still the idea of what autonomy looks like, what dignity of risk looks like. So we need to go into it not with the idea that it's supported decision making, supported autonomy, whatever that looks like. And again, we needed to look at alternatives to abstinence because that's not what everyone's goal is going to be. And so we really needed to make sure that this kind of vision of harm reduction for people with intellectual disability really looks unique to everyone, and that there's the ability for it to be unique to everyone. So next slide. We recognized that we needed a shift, and I'm going to reference the shift because it's a form of it's an existing harm reduction model that we built our program off of. So we put in for some funding. We were seeing people within Toronto especially continuously being turned down for resources because of substance use, not always problematic. And so we put in an abstract or a proposal, and we got funding. You can go to the next slide, Layla. Yeah, so we have been privileged to be successful for a 4-year funding project to develop and implement a harm reduction program for people with intellectual disabilities. So really quickly, it is a 4-year project. It is 2 clinical teams. Sorry, again, Health Canada, I really want to honor the people that are funding this. Health Canada, their substance use and addictions program is who is funding this. 2 clinical teams. We'll have 1 in Toronto, 1 in Kenora Rainy River. We are not going far north like Jen's team does. We are going to Kenora, Dryden, Sioux Lookout, and Fort Frances. The hope is perhaps there's capacity in the future to go far north, but right now we're going in what Jen always calls metropolitan Northern Ontario versus the far north. We will be providing in-person and also virtual telehealth supports. And our criteria is fairly loose on purpose. You have to have an intellectual disability or suspected intellectual disability, and there has to be some either current or history of substance use. And at some point there needs to be an interest in looking at that relationship with substances. We will have an intensive case manager, we will have a behavior analyst, and we will have a harm reduction counselor on each of those teams. Part of planning for a community like Toronto versus a community like the North is we really shifted, and I think I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we shifted what some of the positions look like and how we hired and our recruitment. It is a wraparound model. It's based on the principles of the shift. The shift, again, I can share that link, or I don't know if Layla or Jen are able to do. I think it's the shifttraining.ca, but it's online training. Again, it's a harm reduction model for people with intellectual disabilities. It was authored by 4 community living agencies in the North. And we really just took that and the core values of that and just expanded it to be a live living supports. Thanks, Jen. This is really co-designed in partnership with people with intellectual disabilities and who have used or are using substances. Abstinence is not mandatory to be a part of our program, nor is it mandatory to be employed by us through our lived experience positions. We wanted to make it as low barrier as possible. So we do have 2 people with lived experience that are employed as lived experience associates in Toronto, and they are informing our group development. They will lead groups. They will participate in advisory committees. So they really are, we're trying to bring them into all aspects of the work. In the North, we also have people with lived experience that are informing the work. And we've partnered with Indigenous agencies in the North, really to make sure that that cultural lens is also there. Yeah, and then the last thing is just we have an advisory committee. We have one in Toronto, one in the North, that really will hold us accountable to make sure that we're doing the work in the way that we have said we're going to do the work. And again, in Kenora Rainy River, we want to make sure that we've got people on that committee that represent the community, represent the Indigenous agencies, that kind of thing. So that's the Safer Steps program. I'm not using any of my notes, which means I'm going to be lost. Okay, so I just wanted to really quickly have this slide because 2 of the things we did at the beginning of this project is we, for anyone that's had a Health Canada grant or funding, they are very prescripted in the data they want and the research and evaluation they want to go with it. So we're lucky to have a research assistant that specifically supports our program. And so one of the things that came out when we were doing our focus groups and our needs assessment is the fact that we were, again, privileged, so invited into and privileged to meet with groups of people, many of whom were Indigenous, with lived experience, who were street involved, who were so gracious to come and talk to us. One of them was out of the back of a truck. It was very informal, but we were just so privileged to meet with people and really hear what they felt would be helpful in the creation of this kind of project. And so, as you can see, compassion, empathy, kindness, understanding. One of the main things that came out was relationships. And someone said, be there when you say you're going to be there. So I just thought that was really important that which seems so simple is something that's really important to people. They want people that are going to be supporting them to have training, to be able to do this work, both cultural training as well as clinical training. They want, what else? They want to have a voice at the table. They want to be heard. They want their input to be valuable. They highlighted how important it is for the service providers to get to know them and to get to know the people using service. We had someone talk about how they don't want the person supporting them to put their own beliefs and their own values onto them. They want theirs to be heard, and that includes both culturally as well as physical health, mental health, spiritual health, all of those things. So yeah, so I just thought that was an important slide to share. So I didn't include a slide on this, but I was just writing down some notes because Jen and Layla both talked about how they intersect with the justice system. And I want to make sure we're also including that in this. And a few of them are quite similar to to Jen in the sense that we can kind of be brought into many different situations. We're very involved with the Kenora Justice Center in Kenora, which supports Indigenous youth, I think up to 25. It's such a special place to be able to go into. If anyone ever has the opportunity to go to Kenora to the Justice Center, it's a round table. It's got 2 elders that are available. They open and close every court day. They do water ceremony. They do smudging. They speak directly to families that come into the courthouse in the language that the person wants to speak in. It's really, really quite a special place to be in. So I think we hope, that we have a presence there, early intervention, that kind of thing. Again, kind of what Jen said, we can support with, because we have behavior analysts, all of us on our team have behavior analysts. So just supporting around safety planning, risk supports, looking at alternative behaviors that may help them with recidivism and staying out of the Justice Center. I think the other thing that we're really having great conversations about is in supporting people to find ceremony as they're leaving the Justice Center or at risk of being in the Justice Center, but really supporting around adaptive ceremony, like working with the elders, with the local communities. And when the ceremony may not, when the person may not be able to engage in ceremony because of some of their kind of cognitive or sensory needs or that kind of thing, and really working with being flexible. I think the example I use is we partner with an agency in Kenora, WinHack, and they do sweats regularly. And they're really open to kind of opening the sweat space and letting someone see it and letting them kind of go into it and stay for a couple minutes and come out. And just some of that kind of really adapted support for people. The other thing we've been in conversations about is the idea of how to prep for ceremony, how to prep for, so the idea of sobriety or abstinence for a certain number of days before ceremony, and are there communities that might be more flexible with that, that kind of thing. So really navigating through some of that, I think, yeah. And again, we're just starting to make some of those linkages. So we actually get to benefit from, Jen and Layla's teams around connections that have been made in some of those northern communities. Yeah. So lessons learned, I guess we're still learning lessons, and we're going to talk a bit later in a couple of slides around what we've learned around adapting models and that kind of thing. And I think, again, just highlighting strong community connections, strong community relationships, the idea of looking from an Indigenous lens around what wellness is, what support looks like, what treatment looks like, always being mindful of the impact of colonialism and what that means for approaches to wellness. And I think the one thing is just the travel and the impact of travel in those communities. I mean, Jen can speak to this. We sometimes spend a whole day going for 1 hour to an appointment because it's 2.5 hours one way. You get to the community, you spend 2 hours and then 2.5 hours back. So really just the impact of the North and how vast it is, and just travel, winter travel, all of those things. Yeah. So that's it. I think Layla
Yeah,
is going to
great.
do a little bit now. I'm going to excuse myself for 1 second, but I'll leave it to you, Layla. And I don't see any questions or anything, so we're good.
All right, so yeah, now that you're kind of familiar with the work that we do, we'll talk a little bit more broadly about how we adjust our approaches and the way that we work. And hopefully these are kind of lessons learned, which Jen's already kind of talked about a little bit, that will, you can extrapolate and think about how they apply to the work that you do as well. So I'm going to reference a couple of different pieces of literature that I think are really helpful for thinking about Indigenous paradigms, ways of living and working and viewing the world, that are really helpful to thinking about then how we modify our work. So this is an article by Duran from 2006, and it really talks about differences in between Indigenous paradigms and Western paradigms. And you can see that there's quite a number of differences that then play out in our clinical work and in other support work, or when Indigenous people come into contact with Westernized organizations and systems. So, for example, here, time orientation is one that we come up about very commonly in terms of time orientation for Indigenous. An Indigenous paradigm is often more cyclical in moments, and this is really rooted in historical ways that Indigenous people have lived life, how they've understood the relationality between past, present, and future, and also just the way that they have accessed resources since the beginning of time. If we think about, on a most practical level, like obtaining food. In the westernized world, we often adapted to shopping at stores where you can go and you can stock up on groceries for many days, and you're kind of thinking about a linear measurement of time into the future. Whereas for Indigenous people living off of the land, it's really about day to day, in the moment, what do we need and what is available, not taking more than we need, and making sure that we're being responsible about that. And so when that translates into the clinical world, often this might mean that we need to be more flexible about appointment times and scheduling, or when people need services. Sometimes we might be trying to encourage engagement in services, preventative or proactive services, or ongoing services. And sometimes our clients will say, you know what, I just need the help right now for this particular issue, and then I'm going to move on. And so adapting our expectations of how they engage in that service. Or we might also just say, you've got an appointment at 10 o'clock, and someone might show up at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we try to be a lot more flexible about meeting them where they're at, because there's a lot of reasons as to why they may not show up on time for that particular appointment. That might be culturally based. It might also be like trauma-based in terms of just working up the ability to engage with an organization that has often been impressive for them. So that's one example. Another big place where we think about differences is just like the emphasis on relationship, in terms of knowledge emerging from relationship and being something that is co-constructed in interaction and in relationship with each other. And that also being like a collective orientation where we work together, there's mutual respect and sharing and wisdom sharing between members of the community, versus a Western paradigm that is more hierarchical. There's a more individualist orientation, and then it's more about knowledge is something that different humans create through science or research or whatever, and pass down. Rather than co-creating with others. And so when we think about how those things apply to our work, there's a lot of importance in taking the time to build relationship. I typically don't use the title doctor when I'm in the North. I don't find that a particularly helpful term for building relationship. I find other ways to be clear about what my role is and what I do. And also taking a lot of the time to listen to what people have to say, to what the language that they use, and instead of imposing sometimes Westernized language and labels of things or definitions of how we view certain conditions, we might spend time talking about and co-creating an understanding of what's going on for a child or what's going on for a client together, so that we can have a shared understanding and shared knowledge of what the challenges are and how we're going to support those, and also what the strengths are there. So this is there's a number of different things. I encourage you to check out this article, but it's just to kind of help us understand that when we're working with Indigenous people, it's not just like, oh, they're being difficult and they won't fit into our system, and we're just going to keep getting annoyed with them every time they don't engage in our system, but rather thinking there are really legitimate reasons ingrained in tradition, culture, and history as to why people might engage with our westernized systems differently, and we need to be sensitive to how we modify that approach. And I think that kind of really highlights this concept of two-eyed seeing. Two-eyed seeing is the idea that we learn to see from one eye with strengths of Indigenous ways of knowledge and knowing, and the other eye from a Western way of knowing. And we try to use both of these eyes to bring those perspectives together to provide a more holistic type of care. So I think we've already kind of touched on some of how that plays out in terms of, when we might prioritize scientific research or knowledge that has been gained through research methods and writings in academia over time. Indigenous peoples might have a lot of learning from experience and observation over decades. I think one lesson that I learned very, very early on that always sticks with me and I think illustrates this point very well was a documentary that I saw about researchers who were going to the far, far north, working in Inuit communities to understand climate change. And they had all these scientific understandings of what might be happening for climate change. And they were talking to the Indigenous peoples and they were saying, over the years, the location of the sun in the sky has moved. And the researchers are saying, well, that's not possible based on, the research that we do and what we know about science. But for people who have been living in these communities and relying on the land and relying on sunsets and sunrises for generations and generations and generations have noticed the sun is rising in a different location than it used to. And what came to be kind of discovered from that, but bringing those two perspectives together by saying, okay, we understand the knowledge and your observations, and we're going to apply scientific knowledge, then they were able to better understand the refraction of light that was happening from the sun due to climate change. So I think that's like a really interesting example of a very different organization or system where we were able to bring together two-eyed seeing. This is also a really helpful concept in terms of how do we create ethical spaces being the types of places and the processes that are involved to help us relate to each other in a meaningful and transformative way to help bring together different perspectives to create relationship and to treat relationship as the core of any work that we're doing together. It's often really rooted in respect for particular Indigenous teachings. Like I think about the Anishinaabe Seven Grandfather teachings, where we really emphasize things like respect, humility, the truth, and how do we bring those things together to have collaborative and productive relationships with each other. And often some things that are involved in creating ethical spaces are beginning just by introducing and relating to each other. What do we have in common? Where are our shared experiences, this shared humanity, shared values? What are the different perspectives we come from? And then exploring roles and intentions. So really being purposeful about describing the type of work we do, the type of roles, the responsibilities we have, our own positionality, but then also listening to the clients that we work with in terms of who they are in their communities, what their roles are, what their expectations are, what their laws and codes of ethics are, and why those are important to them, or how those have been developed over time. So we can think about how do we intersect those things together. And there's also an important part of ethical spaces of also describing the limits of work together. When we're together, what can I not do? What will you not do? What are the no-go areas? How do we respect those together? And then developing rules of engagement that will help foster kind of collaborative, comfortable, safe, and respectful care with each other. So these are some other tenets that are really helpful for kind of keeping in mind when we are working with Indigenous communities so that we can respect the viewpoints that they're coming from and work in a two-eyed seeing way. Jen.
I think I'm battling. I think I've fought against getting a cold, and I think it's actually happening. So this is kind of repetitive. I'm very mindful of the time, so I'm just going to go through this quick. Patricia asked about referring to safer steps, so I included the link. It's a secure online referral form that you can fill out. So I would just, again, anyone that has an intellectual or suspected intellectual disability, we will also connect with DSO for assessments and eligibility assessments. So yeah, again, this is a bit repetitive, but why are we centering why? And this is very relevant both in Northern Ontario and in Toronto in any situation is people with IDD and who use substances, they know what works, they know the community, they know the language, that kind of thing. They can very definitely highlight gaps that we may miss, and that's happened already in some of the groups and some of the documents that we've created. It's been highlighted quickly what we may have missed or how it may not be plain language, that kind of thing. I think the other thing is it builds trust and accountability within the community. If someone comes and knows that we have other people with living experience, then I think there is that initial, okay, let me check this out. Let me see what it's about. Again, co-designing materials, hiring, and this is very intentional and meaningful hiring. It's not tokenistic. It is equitable pay. It is meaningful work. It is expectations in the same way. I'm a manager, so I meet with the people that are within my portfolio. That includes people with lived experience, and hold them accountable in the same way. So it's intentional, it's respectful, it's not tokenistic, and it needs to be ongoing. So it's not like I'm just going to interview you now. Like it's again ongoing positions. I feel like I went longer than I meant to. Okay. And this, again, we've talked about some of this community relationships, Indigenous worldviews, all of those things, impacts of colonization. Examples around partnering with Indigenous-led organizations. When we're invited into space, we go. We take advantage of every opportunity we have to go, if we're invited to gatherings, if we're invited to do presentations. Jen and I were invited to go meet with the NADAP workers in Kenora. So they're the National Native Drug and Alcohol Program workers that support in community for people that are using substances. When people invite us, we go. Like, that's how you create trust. That's how you learn. That's how you create relationships. Yeah. I think we should do maybe 5 more minutes and then leave some time for questions.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think just to highlight, I think we're ending here too, and just highlighting, really practically speaking, how we have modified some of our approaches. And so within our Lac Seul contract, some service adaptations, it's like travel and virtual service has been a big thing. It's not feasible for us to be there all the time, but also recognizing that travel, being present in the community, allowing people to see you in the community over and over and over again, in a respectful way is a really important piece of building that relationship, and also just understanding all of the taken for granted things that we have in the South that may not operate in the same way. So really understanding how life looks different, and what is feasible and not feasible for people in more remote or northern communities. We also have developed a lot of school and community relationships over the time so that we can have people support us in facilitating work. If we are working with somebody down here and we need access to other resources or to bring in crisis support, again, not only making the effort to build a relationship with the clients, but also the other organizations in the community. We are very flexible about our service delivery. I alluded to this earlier. Often what we will do is we will block for our clinical services like a day. This is your day with Layla. And I have the list of clients that I would typically see, which is usually more than I can fit into the time, because at any given day, many of them will not be at school. And I will just see whoever shows up and is ready and willing and wanting to engage. And so we follow that way instead of having strict appointment times where that often results in like a lot of kids missing service. And we usually try to like keep blocks of our schedule open to be able to facilitate like missed appointments and things like that. And just to like not get upset when clients, and not take it personally when clients can't show up at the time that you had originally scheduled for. And some barriers that we continue to experience in the North that make work hard is, so a lot of school closures, a lot of things that happen in the North that, you know, one day somebody has pulled the fire extinguisher and just fire extinguished the entire school. And so the school has to be shut down for a day, or the construction work hit a water pipe and the whole community is shut down, or the internet is down, or there's an ice storm, or there's been a death in the community. And so everyone is attending a funeral. These are things that are, you know, we have to be respectful about and kind of adjust our work around. Also working with kind of ongoing engagement with people who may be resistant to westernized healthcare systems, like showing caregivers that we can be helpful and respectful and listen to them, and that we're not going to repeat the harms that they've seen in the past. And often that takes a long time. It may be like a year being in a community and trying to build connection with a caregiver before they're ready to have their client or their child engage. And also modifying like the way that we do forms, like our consent process looks a lot different. We use like the school to help us facilitate that because they're familiar people who already have relationship and trust developed. We have video, so we don't have to rely so heavily on language and jargon and things like that. So those are different ways that we modify our approaches.
Thanks, Layla. Okay, so for our MMW team, we rely a lot on the success of strong partnerships and collaborations with the agencies in Northwestern Ontario. Another point is Breaking Bannock has incredibly important in helping foster relationships, trust, and feeling comfortable to receive the clinical service. In Western cultures, it may not be appropriate to accept food, but we found that food brings people together. So participating in fish fry, trying out their traditional foods, and attending feasts have helped build that trust. Coordinators who live up north has helped with the success of tying us together, and they also come with us into the communities, acting as a familiar face. One of our coordinators is of Indigenous descent, and she's able to understand Ojibwe and Ojibwe, which has been so instrumental in communicating with our clients' parents or caregivers who may not speak English. And services in the past undertook a great deal of travel time and costs. Virtual is pretty much free now. And it should be noted that care providers had also endured high stress levels due to having to leave their home to accompany the client on travel in the past. I also want to touch a little bit about adaptive scales. It was, you know, it's westernized, right? Measuring daily living skills that has questions kind of irrelevant to those who live in northern communities, such as, do they know how to use an escalator, an elevator, or cross the lights, just to name a few. Well, in far north communities, these things don't usually exist. And so through a diary study, we were able to develop an adaptive living skills scale for northern communities. And questions that were relevant are, can they chop wood, safely build a fire? Are they able to go hunting or trapping? And can they drive an ATV, run a snow machine, and handle boat safety? Those skills are much more crucial for those living in rural northern communities. And for challenges we still continue to see and individuals that face them is connection difficulties. Layla touched point a little bit on that. Sometimes when the internet is down, it's not your neighborhood or your house alone, it's the whole entire community. And if you don't have internet in your house, you can't go to the library because there is none. You go to the nursing station, which is a lot of the times the only place to do the sessions. And the other difficulty is people being out of town. Communities who are surrounded by water have unique challenges that can be costly to fly with a little plane. It's not a huge one. It's a very tiny plane. Or you have to wait for winter so that the water becomes ice and it becomes the ice road that you travel out of the community to go get your supplies or to visit family and friends from a different community. And appointments may not be kept. Rescheduling is totally typical. Layla mentioned that as well. Limited loss in documentation, especially when, you know, we don't think about these things, but there's a lot of forest fires in the summertime. And they move from different houses to houses sometimes, or is transient. So that's another limitation, as well as evacuation is common due to those forest fires. They can be displaced anywhere in Ontario, sometimes with little information ahead of time. So we aren't able to connect with them sometimes until they're back in their home. And of course, mentioned a couple of times, transportation is very important to know. We service all of Northwestern Ontario, but it means a lot of ground to cover when our team is on a clinical trip. So it can be exceptionally expensive, long time on the roads, and expensive also to fly far north communities. Thanks.
Oh, I feel like we want to wrap up. There's two things that because a lot of the things that Jen and Layla talked about are really similar. There's two things that I want to just kind of highlight as things that we're really proud of. So number one, we have pushed through the idea of recruitment and people that are involved in the justice system, hiring people and doing a vulnerable sector check. It seems like something really minor, but when you're hiring people that may or may not have involvement with the Justice Center, it can be a huge barrier. So we've been able to push through that and change our policy. And the other thing is recruitment in the North. We are also a fully non-Indigenous team. So we recognize our place when we go into these communities. And so partnering with Indigenous agencies in the North has become really, really important. And the other thing is we were able to shift some of our hiring, so changing some of our educational expectations and really valuing lived experience in the same way we value education. And that's been really helpful to get the right kind of person who can support that community in the North. So I think those are the other things that are here. I think those are two things that we that are the three things that we've really worked on.
Thank you, Jen. And so final thoughts, we just want to ensure that we continue to, at least the three of our programs continue to show up as a way to deepen relationships. Many times people, again, say they come back, but for various reasons, they're not able to. And this disappointment has been felt by individuals and communities on an unfortunate and historical frequent basis. And that is why it's important for us that we stay connected and working in a harmonious way, whether it be in person, by phone, or even video. Our Northern programs has provided us with an intimate understanding of the First Nations principles, cultures, values, and different community to community traditions. And we strive to continue to be culturally sensitive by engaging in ongoing professional development, as well as continuing to amplify the voices of the Indigenous peoples. We maintain a close connection through visits several times a year, and this has helped develop a really great appreciation, understanding, and respect of Northwestern Ontario and the numerous communities we are involved with, as it is reflected in our day-to-day practice. And last, community partnerships will always be the key to success of our programs.
So
Thank you oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say there's a couple
interrupt.
resources here for anybody who wants to access assessment. That was one of the questions. So these slides will go out. In particular, FASD 1 lists a lot of where you can get FASD assessments, and we do DSO eligibility and comprehensive and FASD assessments at Surrey Place. And here's our contact information in case anyone wants to get a hold of us. I will be on leave as of March 9th, so I encourage contacting the Jens.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you for the presentation today. The learnings that you've done and that you've shared with us, and the experiences that you've had, along with the knowledge that you bring to the work, it is extremely intersectional, what you just described to us. This is like very, very integrated. And I know in Toronto, we have, our certain way of thinking and working and doing, but we're working oftentimes with people who are coming from all over the province and all over Canada, really. And I think that this opportunity to hear from you about this work you're doing, both from the point of view of a resource, but also from the point of view of the approach and the way you're going at it and what you have learned through that has been incredible to hear. And I really want to thank you all for the work that you are doing, as well as for the presentation today. I see there were a lot of questions along the way. I know we gave you questions beforehand, and you've really answered all of them. There aren't any outstanding questions in the chat. You got a lot of thank yous coming in. And I see a few connections maybe have been made as well. So that's really wonderful to see. So just a huge thank you to all of you. I know Dominica has put a link in to the chat asking our participants to fill that in about their experience of today. I know some people have had to leave already. I don't want to close it off entirely, but to give you back the last word, but just please thank you. Please know that it's a huge thank you for today, and really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Miigwech.
Miigwech.
Rich.